My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 55, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. The autumn leaves were falling outside my suburban Chicago home, painting the sidewalks in brilliant shades of amber and crimson as I prepared for what I assumed would be another quiet birthday dinner with my 3 adult children. The October wind whistled through the maple trees I'd planted with my late husband 28 years ago, their branches now towering over our 2-story colonial house with its white picket fence and wraparound porch. Sarah, 32, had driven in from Milwaukee with her twins, navigating the 3-hour drive despite Emma's car sickness and Ethan's endless questions about why grown-ups needed birthday parties. Michael, 29, flew in from Denver where he worked as a software engineer, complaining about the delayed flight and Chicago's unpredictable weather. Jessica, 26, took the train from downtown Chicago where she worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floors as she rushed in, apologizing for being late due to a last-minute client call. The dining room smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and my famous apple pie, the same menu I'd prepared for special occasions since the children were small. I'd spent the entire day cooking, just like I had for the past 25 years since their father passed away in that terrible car accident when they were just 7, 4, and 1. The table was set with our best china, the delicate rose pattern I'd received as a wedding gift from my mother-in-law, each piece carefully preserved through decades of family meals, homework sessions, and late-night conversations. Candles flickered softly in my grandmother's silver candlesticks, casting warm shadows on walls lined with family photos spanning 3 generations. My parents' wedding portrait from 1952, pictures of Tom and me on our honeymoon in Niagara Falls, snapshots of first steps and birthday parties, graduation photos, and recent pictures of Emma and Ethan at their school play. "Mom, you've outdone yourself again," Sarah said, helping herself to mashed potatoes while simultaneously cutting Ethan's turkey into bite-sized pieces. Her blonde hair, so much like mine had been at her age, was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and I noticed new lines of fatigue around her eyes. Single motherhood was wearing on her, though she'd never admit it. Her twins, Emma and Ethan, both 8, were unusually well-behaved tonight, probably because I'd promised them extra dessert and a sleepover in the guest room if they ate their vegetables without complaint. Michael raised his wine glass, the expensive Cabernet he'd brought from Denver. "To Mom, the strongest woman we know, happy 55th birthday." His dark eyes, so much like his father's, held a mixture of love and concern that I'd grown accustomed to seeing whenever my children looked at me these days. We clinked glasses, the crystal singing softly, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. The familiar warmth of family, the comfort of tradition, the satisfaction of another year, survived and celebrated. Then Jessica, always the most direct of my children, set down her fork and looked at me with that serious expression I'd learned to recognize over the years, the same look she'd worn when she'd announced her decision to break up with her college boyfriend, when she'd chosen her career over graduate school, when she'd moved to the city against my worried protests. "Mom, we need to talk about something," Jessica began, exchanging glances with her siblings in that conspiratorial way they'd perfected as children plotting surprise parties or covering for each other's mishaps. "We've been worried about you. Being alone in this big house, the neighborhood's changing, property taxes are increasing, and honestly, the maintenance must be overwhelming." Sarah nodded enthusiastically, gesturing around the dining room with its high ceilings and ornate crown molding. "There's this lovely place in Milwaukee, Mom. Sunset Manor. They have book clubs, gardening activities, game nights, and even organized trips to museums and theaters. You'd love it, and you'd be close to the twins." Michael leaned forward, his software engineer's mind clearly having calculated what he thought was the most logical solution to my perceived problem. "And honestly, Mom, at your age, you're too old to be thinking about dating or finding someone new. It's time to focus on enjoying your golden years peacefully, without the stress of trying to navigate modern romance." The words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable landing with the force of a slap. "Too old to date? I felt my cheeks flush, not from embarrassment, but from a mixture of hurt and indignation that my own children, these people I'd raised to be thoughtful and compassionate, could be so dismissive of my feelings, my desires, my fundamental humanity. Besides, Jessica added, twirling her wineglass nervously, what kind of man would be interested in a 55-year-old widow anyway? You don't want to end up with some creepy old guy who's just looking for someone to take care of him, or worse, some fortune hunter after your savings. Please let me know where you're watching this video from, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you're enjoying Margaret's story. What do you think her secret could be? I set my wineglass down carefully, my hands trembling, slightly with a combination of hurt and barely contained frustration. The room fell silent, except for the soft classical music playing from the vintage radio Tom had restored years ago, and the occasional giggle from the twins who were blissfully unaware of the emotional minefield their elders were navigating. Taking a deep breath that seemed to draw strength from somewhere deep within my chest, I looked at each of my children's faces. Faces I'd watched grow from chubby-cheeked toddlers to the accomplished adults sitting before me. Faces I'd kissed goodbye every morning for school, faces I'd comforted through heartbreaks and celebrated through triumphs. You know what? I said, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. I have something to tell you all. I reached into my black leather purse, the one Jessica had given me for Mother's Day 2 years ago, and pulled out a small velvet box that had been burning a hole in my conscience for months. I placed it gently on the mahogany table next to the turkey carving knife, right between the gravy boat and the bowl of cranberry sauce I'd made from my mother's recipe. The diamonds caught the candlelight, sparkling like tiny stars against the midnight blue velvet, throwing prismatic rainbows across the white tablecloth. 6 months ago, I announced, my voice growing stronger with each word, someone very special asked me to marry him, and I said yes. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant sound of neighbors' children playing in their backyard. Sarah's fork clattered to her plate with a sound that seemed to echo through the room. Michael's mouth fell open like a door with broken hinges. Jessica stared at the ring box as if it were a venomous snake that might suddenly strike. What do... You mean engaged? Sarah finally managed to stammer, her voice rising an octave. Mom, you never said anything about dating anyone. We talk every week, and you've never mentioned meeting someone, going on dates, having a relationship. Because I knew you'd react exactly like this, I replied, lifting the engagement ring from its velvet nest and slipping it onto my finger where it settled with the familiar weight of a promise fulfilled. The 3-carat solitaire felt comforting. Now, though, I'd only been wearing it privately for months, taking it out late at night to admire how it caught the light from my bedroom lamp. Michael ran his hands through his dark hair, a nervous gesture he'd inherited from his father, along with his engineering aptitude and his tendency to overthink every problem. Mom, this is crazy. You barely leave the house except for grocery, shopping, and your book club. Where did you even meet someone? Online dating at your age is dangerous. There are scammers everywhere preying on lonely seniors. The word lonely stung more than he could possibly know, especially because it revealed how little my children truly understood about my life, my daily existence, my emotional landscape. Actually, I said, standing up and smoothing the fabric of my navy blue dress, the one I'd bought specifically for tonight because David had said it brought out my eyes. You all know him quite well. He'll be here any minute, and I think it's time you met him properly. Jessica's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Here? Tonight? Mom, you invited some random man to family dinner without telling us? What if he's dangerous? What if he's been manipulating you? He's not random, sweetheart, I said, walking to the window to check for headlights in the driveway, my heart beating like a teenager's before prom. In fact, he taught all 3 of you. Mr. David Chen was your high school English teacher. The collective gasp from my children was audible, a sharp intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Emma and Ethan looked up from their plates, sensing the drama unfolding around them, but not understanding the magnitude of the revelation. "Mr. Chen?" Sarah whispered, her face pale as moonlight. "Our Mr. Chen? The one who made us read Shakespeare and write those impossible 5-page essays about symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird?" "The very same," I said, hearing the familiar sound of David's Honda Civic pulling into my driveway, its engine purring softly in the autumn evening. "And before you say anything else, let me remind you that he's 53, hardly some creepy old guy, as you so eloquently put it, Jessica." As I walked toward the front door, passing the family photos that documented our history, I could hear frantic whispering behind me, my children's voices overlapping in confused, urgent tones. My heart pounded with a mixture of nervousness and excitement as I opened the heavy oak door. David stood on my front porch wearing the navy blue sweater I'd bought him last month at Marshall Fields, holding a beautiful bouquet of autumn flowers, bronze mums, bright yellow sunflowers, and branches of oak leaves arranged with the artistic eye that had first attracted me to him during our community center book discussions. "Ready for this?" he asked softly, leaning down to kiss my cheek with the tenderness that still made my knees weak after 2 years of growing love. "More than ready," I replied, squeezing his free hand and drawing strength from his calm presence. It's time they learned that love doesn't have an expiration date, and that their mother is still a woman with her own desires and dreams. Walking back into the dining room with David beside me felt like stepping through a portal into an alternate universe where past and present collided in the most surreal way possible. I watched my children's faces transform from shock to recognition to something approaching complete bewilderment, their expressions cycling through emotions like a slideshow of human reactions. David set the flowers on the sideboard next to my grandmother's china cabinet and turned to face the table with the same composed demeanor I remembered from parent-teacher conferences years ago. "Hello, Sarah, Michael, Jessica," David said warmly, his voice carrying that distinctive blend of authority and kindness that had made him such an effective educator. "It's wonderful to see you all again as adults, though I imagine this is quite an unexpected surprise." Sarah was the first to recover, her maternal instincts and natural politeness overriding her shock as she stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "Mr. Chen, this is..." She gestured helplessly between David and me, her hands fluttering like confused butterflies. "Completely inappropriate," Michael finished, his voice tight with an anger I hadn't heard since his teenage years, when he'd stormed out of the house over curfew disagreements. "Mom? He was our teacher. Don't you see how weird this is? How wrong it feels?" Jessica remained silent, but I could see her sharp mind working, analyzing the situation from every angle, like she did with her marketing campaigns. She'd always been the most thoughtful of my children, the one who considered all sides before rendering judgment. David pulled out my chair for me, a small gesture that spoke volumes about his character and the way he treated me with respect and care. "I understand this is unexpected and perhaps uncomfortable," he said, taking the seat I'd prepared for him next to mine. "Perhaps I should explain how this relationship developed." "Please do," Michael said, his tone dripping with skepticism and barely contained hostility. David looked at me for permission, and I nodded, grateful for his willingness to be patient with my children's shock and defensive reactions. "Your mother and I reconnected 2 years ago at the Riverside Community Center," David began, his teacher's instinct for clear explanation taking over. "We were both attending a book discussion group focused on contemporary American literature. I had been widowed for 3 years after losing my wife Linda to ovarian cancer, and I was struggling to find meaning and purpose in my retirement. I felt a familiar pang of sympathy for the grief David had carried, having walked that dark path of loss myself decades earlier. David had just moved back to Chicago from Portland, where he'd been caring for his wife during her illness, I added, seeing the surprise register on my children's faces. They hadn't known about Mrs. Chen's death, hadn't realized that David, like me, understood the particular loneliness of losing a life partner. At first, we were simply friends sharing a love of literature, David continued, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence that had once captivated teenage minds. We'd grab coffee after book club at that little cafe on Madison Street, discussing the themes in the novels we'd read, debating character motivations, arguing about the relevance of classic literature in modern society. Sarah sat back down, slowly, her defensive posture softening as she began to see David not as her former teacher, but as a complete person with his own history of love and loss. "But it became more than literary discussions, didn't it?" I said, smiling at the memory of those early conversations that had stretched from coffee into dinner, from book talk into sharing our deepest fears about aging alone. "Your mother challenged every assumption I had about the books we read," David said, his eyes lighting up with genuine admiration. "She saw connections I'd missed, offered interpretations that made me reconsider works I thought I understood completely. Her intelligence and insight were remarkable, but more than that, her compassion for the human condition shone through in everything she said." Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you want to see how this family drama unfolds. What do you think will happen when they learn the whole truth? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as my children absorbed David's words, their expressions shifting between confusion, curiosity, and lingering skepticism. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 o'clock, marking time's passage as we navigated this emotional minefield. Sarah looked genuinely perplexed, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But you never mentioned any of this during our phone calls, Mom. When I ask what you've been up to, you always say, 'Nothing much,' or the usual routine." "Because our phone calls are usually you telling me about the twins' soccer schedules and piano lessons while you're driving between appointments," I replied, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "When I tried to tell you about my book club discussions, you'd say it was nice that I was staying mentally active and then change the subject to Emma's reading progress or Ethan's math struggles." Michael ran his hands through his hair again, a gesture that transported me back to his frustrated teenage years when calculus homework had reduced him to tears. "We were trying to stay connected, Mom. We call every week, we visit for holidays." "You call out of obligation," I said, the words coming out harsher than I'd intended. "You check in to make sure I'm not dead in a ditch somewhere, but you don't actually want to hear about my life unless it involves medical appointments or house repairs." Jessica finally spoke up, her voice smaller than usual. "Is that really how you see our relationship, Mom?" I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the frustration of years of being diminished, categorized as Mom rather than seen as Margaret, a complete woman with interests, desires, and the capacity for growth. "Sweetheart, I love you all more than life itself," I said, reaching across the table to touch Jessica's hand. "But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem to be managed. When I mentioned taking dance lessons, Michael, you warned me about falling and breaking a hip. When I told you about volunteering at the literacy center, Sarah, you worried I was getting too involved with strangers who might take advantage of me." David cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps I should share something that might help you understand, not just how we met, but why I fell so deeply in love with your mother." He paused, gathering his thoughts with the same deliberate care he'd once used to explain complex literary themes to distracted teenagers. 6 months ago, I was at the Riverside Literacy Center where I volunteer every Tuesday and Thursday, helping adults who never learned to read or who need to improve their skills for job advancement. There was a situation with one of our students, a woman named Maria Gonzalez, 43 years old, mother of 3 teenagers. I felt my chest tighten, remembering that emotionally charged day vividly. Maria had been successfully hiding her illiteracy from her children for their entire lives. She'd memorized sight words, asked store clerks for help finding items, pretended to read bedtime stories by making up plots based on the pictures. But her secret was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. "What happened?" Sarah asked. Despite herself, her natural curiosity overriding her resistance to this conversation. Maria's oldest son, 16-year-old Carlos, had been bullying a classmate, calling him stupid for being in remedial reading classes, making jokes about dumb kids who couldn't keep up. The school requested a conference with Maria about Carlos's behavior and the disciplinary action they were considering. David's voice took on the weight of the memory, the emotional gravity of that day still affecting him months later. Maria was terrified. She'd received the conference letter from school, but she couldn't read it. She knew it was important, but she was convinced that if she went to the meeting, the teachers would discover her secret, and her children would be ashamed of her forever. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. I found her, crying in the hallway outside the conference room, clutching that letter like it might spontaneously burst into flames. She was 20 minutes late for the appointment, paralyzed by fear and shame. I squeezed David's hand, remembering how his voice had cracked when he'd called me that evening to tell me what had happened. "That's when your mother appeared," David continued, his voice warm with admiration. "I don't know how she knew Maria needed help. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was her volunteer coordinator instincts. But she sat down on that uncomfortable plastic chair next to Maria and asked, very quietly, 'Would you like me to read that letter with you?' The dining room was completely silent now, except for the soft sound of Emma coloring in her activity book and Ethan building something with his dinner rolls. For the next 3 hours, your mother worked with Maria, not just helping her sound outwards, but teaching her strategies for participating in the conference confidently. She role-played difficult conversations, helped Maria prepare questions to ask the teachers, and most importantly, helped her understand that her love for her children was more important than her educational limitations. Michael's expression began to soften, the hard lines of skepticism around his eyes giving way to something that looked like respect. "But that wasn't the most remarkable part," David continued, his voice gaining strength as he relived the memory that had changed everything for him. "Your mother didn't just help Maria navigate that one crisis. She convinced Maria to let her speak directly to Carlos about empathy, respect, and the complex reasons why people struggle with education." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, knowing where this story was heading and how it would sound to my children who had never seen me in this light. "Mom talked to a teenage bully?" Michael asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "She did much more than talk," I said quietly, remembering the intensity of that afternoon. The way Carlos had initially dismissed me as just another annoying adult before gradually beginning to understand the weight of his actions. I shared my own story with him, I continued, looking directly at each of my children. I told him about dropping out of Northwestern after 2 years when your father died, how I'd always felt incomplete without my degree, how I'd hidden my educational insecurities behind the role of devoted mother and widow. Sarah's eyes widened. "You told a stranger's kid about Dad's accident?" I told him about resilience, about how education isn't just about intelligence, it's about opportunity, support, and circumstances beyond our control. I explained how his mother worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat, how she'd sacrificed her own learning to ensure her children could succeed. David took up the story again. Carlos broke down crying right there in the school hallway. He'd never considered that his mother might have her own struggles, her own dreams deferred by necessity and circumstance. What happened to them? Jessica asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Your mother didn't just walk away after that conversation, David said, his pride in me evident in every word. She helped organize a peer mentoring program at the school, where older students who had overcome learning challenges worked with younger ones who were struggling. Carlos became the program's first mentor, I added. He now tutors 3 younger students every week after school, and his grades have improved dramatically. More importantly, his relationship with his mother has completely transformed. Michael was staring at me, as if seeing me for the first time. You created a mentoring program? We created it together, David corrected gently. Your mother had the vision and the passion. but she needed someone with educational experience to help navigate the school bureaucracy and design an effective curriculum. I stood up and began clearing plates again, needing something to do with my hands as the emotions of that day washed over me again. "Maria earned her GED last month," I said, my voice thick with pride. "She's starting community college classes in January, studying to become a certified medical assistant." David stood to help me, and I noticed how naturally we moved together. In the kitchen, how he anticipated what I needed without being asked. How we developed the rhythm of partnership that comes from months of shared purpose and growing intimacy. "That's when I knew I wasn't just attracted to Margaret," David said, stacking plates with the efficiency of a man who'd lived alone and learned to manage a household. "I was in love with her strength, her refusal to accept limitations, whether imposed by others or by herself, and her absolute determination to lift others up rather than let her own pain make her bitter." "There's something else you should know," I said, setting the dishes in the kitchen pass-through, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. "David and I aren't just getting married for companionship or because we're lonely. We're combining our lives in every meaningful way. I'm selling this house." The collective gasp was immediate and sharp, Emma and Ethan looking up from their activities with wide eyes at the sudden sound. "What?" Sarah stood up so quickly, her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Mom, you can't sell this house. This is our childhood home. This is where Dad proposed to you, where we took first steps, where we carved our heights into the kitchen door frame." "Where will you live?" Michael asked, his engineering mind immediately jumping to practical concerns. "We've put an offer on a beautiful 2-bedroom condo downtown," I announced, feeling liberated by finally speaking the truth aloud. "It's in a converted warehouse building on the near north side, walking distance from the Literacy Center, the community college, and the Museum of Contemporary Art." Jessica looked like she might faint. "Downtown? Mom, you hate the city. You always said it was too noisy, too crowded, too dangerous." "That was 20 years ago, when I was managing 3 children and worried about safety," I replied. "I'm not that person anymore. I've been taking the train downtown twice a week for months now, exploring neighborhoods, attending cultural events, discovering how much the city has to offer." "The condo has 2 bedrooms," David added, clearly trying to paint a picture of our planned life together. "One will be my office where I'm writing a book about innovative teaching methods for adult learners, and the other will be Margaret's art studio." "Art studio?" all 3 of my children said in unison. I smiled at their shocked faces. "I've been taking watercolor classes at the community center for 8 months now. Professor Martinez says I have natural talent and should consider pursuing it seriously. I'm having my first solo exhibition next month, 12 paintings inspired by the stories of the Literacy Center students." The silence that followed was broken by Emma's excited voice. "Grandma, you're an artist like in the movies?" "I'm trying to be, sweetheart," I said, grateful for her uncomplicated enthusiasm. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you want to see how this incredible transformation story continues. What do you think Margaret's children? I will say next. The weight of my revelations hung in the air like morning fog, thick with possibility and tinged with the uncertainty that accompanies any major life change. My children sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the mother they thought they knew with the complex, evolving woman sitting before them. Emma tugged insistently on Sarah's sleeve, her 8-year-old wisdom cutting through the adult confusion, like a beam of sunlight. "Mommy, why is everyone upset? Grandma looks really, really happy. Isn't that good?" Out of the mouths of babes. I knelt down to Emma's level, this innocent child who could see what the supposedly sophisticated adults couldn't. That happiness radiates from a person's core and transforms everything around them. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead. "You're absolutely right. I am happier than I've been in many, many years." David moved to stand behind me, his hand gently resting on my shoulder in a gesture so natural and protective that I felt my heart swell with gratitude for finding love again when I'd thought that chapter of my life was permanently closed. Perhaps we should share the real reason we wanted to gather everyone together tonight, David said, his voice carrying the weight of our biggest announcement yet. I took a deep breath, preparing for what I knew would be the most shocking revelation of all. We're not just getting married and moving downtown to play house like a couple of retirees. We're starting something much more significant together, the Margaret and David Chen Foundation for Adult Literacy and Second Chances. Michael's whine. Glass stopped halfway to his lips. A foundation? Like a real non-profit organization? As real as it gets, I confirmed, feeling stronger with each word. We're using the proceeds from selling this house, combined with David's teacher pension contributions and my savings from 25 years of careful budgeting, to create a comprehensive program for adults who want to complete their education. Jessica was staring at me open-mouthed. Mom, do you have any idea how much work that involves? The legal requirements, the fundraising, the administrative overhead. Which is why we've spent the last 4 months working with lawyers, accountants, and nonprofit consultants to establish proper procedures, David interjected smoothly. Your mother has thrown herself into learning grant writing, nonprofit management, and program evaluation with the same intensity she once brought to raising 3 children as a single parent. Sarah was shaking her head in disbelief. I can't process this. 6 hours ago, I thought my biggest worry was convincing you to move to a retirement community. Now you're telling me you're starting a foundation? Not just any foundation, I said, my voice growing stronger with passion. A comprehensive program offering GED preparation, college readiness courses, job training certification, financial literacy workshops, and even college scholarships, specifically for parents who never got the chance to finish their education. David pulled out his phone and showed them a professional website with our foundation's logo, a tree with books for leaves and roots that spelled out Second Chances. We launched the website last week. We already have 15 applicants for our first cohort starting in January. Maria was just the beginning, I continued, feeling the excitement build as I talked about our work. We've already helped 12 adults earn their GEDs, and 3 of them have started college courses. Carmen is studying to become a registered nurse at Malcolm X College. James is pursuing a teaching degree at Chicago State. And Patricia is working toward a business administration degree while running a small catering company. Michael set his wine glass down carefully, his analytical mind clearly working through the implications. How are you funding this? Even with the house sale and your savings, running a nonprofit requires ongoing revenue streams. We've applied for grants from the Chicago Community Trust, the Joyce Foundation, and several corporate sponsors, David explained. I've also secured partnerships with 3 community colleges to provide reduced tuition rates for our students. Jessica suddenly leaned forward, her marketing instincts clearly engaged. What about publicity, social media presence, community outreach? I smiled, recognizing the shift in her tone from skeptical to professionally interested. We were hoping you might be willing to help us with that, sweetheart. Your expertise in digital marketing could make the difference between helping a few dozen people and reaching hundreds. For the first time all evening, Jessica smiled. Really smiled, not the polite, worried expression she'd been wearing. Are you seriously offering me the chance to market a literacy foundation? Mom, this is exactly the kind of meaningful work I've been wanting to get involved in. Sarah wiped her eyes, and I realized she was crying. Not tears of sadness or anger, but something deeper and more complex. Mom, I'm so ashamed of how we talked to you tonight. We've been treating you like you were fragile, like you needed to be managed and protected when you've been out there changing lives. You've been stronger than any of us realized, Michael added, standing up and walking around the table toward me. Can you forgive us for being such incredible idiots? I opened my arms and hugged my son, feeling his tall frame shake slightly with emotion. There's nothing to forgive, sweetheart. You were trying to take care of me the only way you knew how, based on assumptions about what my life looked like from the outside. One by one, my children embraced both David and me, their resistance melting away like ice in spring sunshine. Jessica held on the longest, whispering in my ear, "I want to volunteer with the foundation. I want to help you build something amazing." "We were counting on it," David whispered back, making her laugh through her tears. As we settled back around the table, this time with David truly integrated into our family circle, Emma piped up with her characteristic directness. "Does this mean we get to be flower girls in a real wedding?" "The most beautiful wedding this family has ever seen," I promised, looking around at the faces of the people I loved most in the world. Because love at 55 isn't smaller or quieter than love at 25. It's richer, deeper, more grateful for every precious moment, and absolutely determined to make the most of the time we have left. Sarah raised her wine glass again, her voice thick with emotion. "To Mom and David, and to second chances, new dreams, and the courage to keep growing no matter what age the calendar says you are." To second chances, we all echoed, the crystal glasses singing in harmony. Later that evening, as David and I stood on the front porch watching my children's cars disappear down the tree-lined street, Sarah hugged me with an intensity I hadn't felt from her since she was a little girl. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she whispered. "I hope I have half your courage and vision when I'm your age." "You will, darling," I assured her. Because courage isn't about age. It's about choosing hope over fear, growth over stagnation, and love over the safety of staying exactly where you are. As the last taillight disappeared around the corner, David took my hand and squeezed gently. "Ready to start our next chapter, future Mrs. Thompson Chen?" I looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, feeling lighter and more hopeful than I had in decades. "More than ready, Mr. Chen. Let's go change the world, one student at a time." Thank you for following Margaret's incredible journey of love, courage, and second chances. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories and hit that like button if this story touched your heart.